I would wager that most of you have never heard of Gerty Cori. I know that because I've asked around, I've asked students, physicians, teachers, and draw a blank. Well, obviously, since she has had a postage stamp about her, she must be significant. And indeed, she is. She was the first ever woman to win the Nobel Prize in Medicine and Physiology in 1947. And obviously, that's a big deal. Her story is a fascinating one. She was born in Prague, which at that time was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And during her first year of medical school, she met her husband, Karl, with whom she eventually shared the 1947 Nobel Prize. Well, they ended up in the US when anti-Semitism reared its ugly head in Europe, and she was Jewish. And they ended up in Buffalo, New York at a research institute where her husband was hired as a professor. But she, being a woman, was only given a job as a pathologist at a fraction of the salary of her husband. They started to produce a number of research papers. They were interested in how the body handles nutrients, particularly glucose. You know that the body is the most complex machine on the face of the earth. And everything that we do, from typing on a keyboard to running, requires energy. This energy actually comes from glucose, which is our main fuel. And this is what the Coris researched. Basically, they gave us the clue of how we get energy, how the body functions. And you know that when you run a marathon, some people will hit the wall, as it is said. All of a sudden, they just run out of energy. Well, the Coris explained how this happens. The body, of course, ingests glucose in the form of starch and sugar, and converts it into glycogen, which is the form in which glucose is stored in the muscles and in the liver. And when you are running, you are inhaling oxygen and you're metabolizing, you're basically combusting the fuel in your body. But when you're running fast enough, you run out of oxygen and the body has to go into what is called anaerobic respiration. And this is when the stored glycogen gets converted into glucose, and then it gets converted into lactic acid, and it's a complicated process, but the body will then convert the lactic acid back to glycogen. And all of this we know from the work of the Coris. They basically demystified the functioning of the body. They were eventually hired at Washington University, the pair of them, but Gerty had 1/10 the salary of Karl, because women back then in the 1940s were just recognized as valuable researchers. Of course she was, which is why she eventually had a stamp minted after her. Unfortunately, there's a mistake in the stamp. When you look at it carefully, the bond on carbon number 1 shows that it is linked to a phosphorus atom instead of the oxygen. It was never corrected. But by the time that the stamp was issued in 2008, both of the Coris had passed away, so they were not annoyed by this. And also, there's a monument to Cori in Israel on the Nobel Boulevard, as it is called, in Rishon LeZion, which is just outside of Tel Aviv. And every Jewish Nobel Prize winner has a monument named after them with an explanation of what they did. Unfortunately, they made a mistake here. They exchanged the Y and the I in her name, in Gerty Cori. Gerty should end in a Y and Cori in an I. I hope that they will make that correction, because she certainly deserves to be looked after in the proper fashion. And now, for those of you who never heard of Gerty Cori, now you know the story.